G'day and welcome to the Farmers Advice podcast, where we talk all things farming. So make sure you click subscribe wherever you listen. It's our entry fee for the podcast. I want to make this the best podcast for farmers right across Australia. Make sure you share it with your mates. Take it away, Laura.
This is Laura from Laura Farms, and you are listening to the Farms Advice Podcast, the podcast for farming. Sit back wherever you are, whether you're in the tractor cab or the shop, and enjoy the episode.
Dennis, welcome back to the podcast from your long trip overseas. Telling everyone about your book, but also a little bit of your knowledge as well.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jack. I really appreciate being on the podcast. We were just talking the last time I think we had a chat was probably at the end of last year, and there's been a lot going on. Some things that have made the book I wrote, War and Wheat, a bit more relevant, considering the amount of geopolitical challenges around the world. And yeah, I just did a trip about it.
That's interesting. Like when we were talking, in my head, I was thinking, conflict around the world sort of coming to an end, and it's sort of really become more relevant as we go on within the agricultural farming sphere.
Yeah, well, look, there's always been conflict, but it feels like it's happening a little bit more frequently. It all started, or the most recent round started with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Then we saw the Houthi rebel attacks in the Red Sea. And now, of course, we saw the Iran-Israel conflict. And kind of one of the things I'm seeing is that the more of these conflicts you have, even if they are relatively short-lived, like the Iran-Israel the conflict's been going on for a while, some could argue, but the most recent iteration ended relatively quickly. But if you're like an importing government or the government of an importing nation anywhere in the world, you're getting pretty concerned that, oh God, what if the next geopolitical flashpoint is somewhere where it's vital from a supply chain point of view, and suddenly I have issues. You're seeing this trend of governments focusing on self-sufficiency continuing to rise, where they want to make sure they produce more locally, even if economically it might not make sense.
Do you think Australia as a whole, we could produce our inputs with what we have currently, or that would be a pretty big bill to get going? Looking at fertilizer coming from the Middle East and alike.
Well, look, also, is the microphone okay?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah, okay. Look, I don't think I'm in a position to say whether, from like an economic standpoint, whether it's viable to onshore a lot of the manufacturing for our farm inputs, but we can comment from the perspective of how critical it is. I don't think many, when we had COVID, a lot of people said, we as a nation shouldn't worry where we're never going to have a situation where we don't have enough food. But that also assumes we can get all the inputs we need. And that's the same for any other sort of challenge. It doesn't have to be COVID related. It can be just geopolitical. But if we have supply chain disruptions, whether that impacts fuel or fertilizer or agrochemicals, suddenly it becomes a significant challenge to produce that food that we kind of take for granted.
And probably like a relevant one is our input of fertilizer currently within the media. It was pretty much telling farmers to buy now, hurry up and get your fert before it goes up. Is that what we're seeing behind the scenes as well? Is there a decrease in supply?
This is in relation to the Israel-Iran situation recently.
Is that what the connection is of why the prices would be going up?
Well, if you look at the Middle East, they account for a significant proportion of not only like fertilizer production, but also energy. And if you look at what the costs are to producing fertilizer, a lot of it is actually energy or energy goods. And whenever that price goes up, so does the cost of fertilizer. I remember there was a period after Russia's invasion of Ukraine where there were natural gas flows that were slowing into Europe, and energy prices skyrocketed, and there was a really significant proportion of fertilizer companies and fertilizer plants that just suddenly became unviable from a production standpoint, and they had to shut down. So the higher energy prices go, the higher the cost for farm input producers, and hence the higher the cost of their output, which is fertilizer or whatever else.
Yep. So let's talk about your recent trip away. You did a bit of a book tour, not only across Australia, but across the globe for yourself, get a better understanding, but also to share War and Wheat, your book. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so look, the objective was to take advantage of the book release before everyone forgets that I published a book in probably 6 months' time. And I thought I'd reach out to as many people as I know overseas who, a lot of these people were contacts that I chat to maybe once a month about what's happening in markets, whether that's in Europe, or in Canada or in the US. And what actually prompted the trip was a conference in Vietnam hosted by the US Wheat Associates. They asked me to come speak. So they had about an audience of 250 people from across Asia who were flour millers, food producers. And I came there and I talked about this kind of what happens typically in a global conflict from a price cycle perspective, and just shared about my book. I had to kind of emphasize that the purpose of my book isn't to forecast the end of the world. It's to actually just show people what happens as the stress points for markets so you can better understand what's happening even today. I think one of the interesting things is there's so many geopolitical things happening. There's so many things that Trump's doing, that China's doing. To most people, some of these things seem irrational and or illogical. But if you look at history and you look at how geopolitical confrontations occurred and why in the past, you start going, oh, you know what? Makes sense why Trump's saying we need in the US they need to build more ships. It's starting to make sense why they want to onshore certain critical industries. And some of the things China is doing from a food security standpoint might not be economical, but it starts to make sense as well. So anyway, that's what I talked about in Vietnam. And then I went over to Switzerland. I spoke to farmers there, and I wanted to have a look at what they do and how that may differ from what happens in Australia. Did the same thing in the US, went to South Dakota, and then made my way up north to Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. And then finally made my way home. So it was a literal 360 around the world.
Yeah. What were the similarities that you saw, maybe from the questions from the crowd or afterwards? Were they all pretty similar to what we have here in Australia, or a little bit more global with their access?
No, I think that one of the key things I noticed is the similarities between people, regardless of where you go, especially in rural areas. So, and that was most definitely the case in Canada. Like the people were similar from a hospitality point of view and even from a humor perspective, but from farming as well. I mean, if I didn't know that I was literally standing in Canada, there wasn't there wasn't much difference, and there was poutine instead of sausage rolls. That was the other that was the other key difference.
What's poutine?
It's like basically it's like a bunch of French fries and there's gravy and there's a lot of cheese. And when I've been told that when it's colder, it tastes a lot better. So it was still good, but I assume in a colder climate it's more unique. Sorry, it's better. One thing I did both in Australia and overseas is I asked farmers what they thought made a successful farmer and a successful farming enterprise. I was kind of curious as to how it's going to differ from one country to another. And what similarities there would be as well. So regardless of where I went, whether that was in Europe, Canada, the US, or Australia, that's what I asked.
And we'll go through those now. You've got a couple of rules of successful farming across Australia, and then also on your tour. Number one rule, what was that for farmers?
Well, and before I tell you, I'll emphasize that I'm not making myself out to be a farmer because clearly I am not. So the objective of what I put together here was asking farmers themselves what they thought made a successful farmer in their region or in their country. And the first rule, and this was the most universal rule by far, was controlling costs. So only spending money on assets that brought further incomes, buying new machinery only when they could clearly calculate the efficiency gains, pardon me, and that the additional income would cover the additional costs or at least outweigh it, more importantly. They said successful farmers, they didn't spend money on a new shed or new equipment just because the old one started to look a little bit shabby. They only bought or invested in new assets when they knew it was going to make them more money than it's going to cost them.
And looking at machinery or infrastructure, what examples was there for that? Because is it to do with the increase in price of manufacturing and then that's passed on to farmers for, say, new combines, headers, tractors and alike?
Yeah, it was the whole lot. It was whether it was machinery sheds, whether it was the machinery themselves. They just emphasized that in the long run, for those that ended up getting larger and had the capacity to do that, and sometimes that, and this brings me to another point, but I'll wait a little bit. It meant that those farmers who are more frugal with their costs and they only spent when they really needed to, they had additional capacity to expand later on.
Is being too frugal also a opportunity cost or losing out a little bit on spending money to make more money as well? Was that a bit of a correlation or no, not at all?
Yeah, look, that would of course be a risk. So that's why they said from their point of view, successful farmers, they knew their numbers. They knew that most likely out of the calculations that they did, that the benefits would outweigh the cost of investing the money that they ended up investing. But the main thing is they said they knew their numbers, they did all the calculations, they weren't just going out on a whim.
Yeah. How do like farmers and across the world, if you got a glimpse into it, what sort of tools were they actually using other than their brains to calculate the cost to work it out if it's going to be feasible to buy the new combine or to continue to use contractors? Is there something that you found that was unique?
From that perspective, look, I didn't ask them specifically what software they used, so I'd be lying if I say a specific one.
But mainly you think it would be through using software rather than transferring from pen to paper. Just like from practicality, people like to know, are they actually succeeding from using their pen and writing it down purely with their calculations, or is there actually
Oh, no,
something?
of course. Presumably they would be using at least a base level of Excel, and going from there. No, I didn't come across farmers who were using pen and paper. What I did come across, interestingly, it's a bit of a different topic, but when I was in Switzerland, a lot of their farming is based around farming organically and sustainably. One of the reasons is that the government provides them subsidies based on the farmers adopting certain sustainability practices. They've just naturally had to gravitate towards growing organic and growing more sustainable. And interestingly, so the farms themselves, they're smaller in size. And I came across farmers who were literally using hand tools to pull weeds out of the ground. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. And then one of them asked me, did they do that in Australia? And I'm like, I don't quite think that's a possibility in Australia. Oh, you got to come here and we'll show you the land size.
It's so different. And right across Europe, did they have questions of how we were doing it as well? Maybe from the wheat producers' side and how the different practices might differ? I think the States and Canada are pretty similar in how we do it, aren't they?
Yeah, so North America is very similar. Europe, the scale is a lot smaller, so they have to do things differently there. They don't buy large machinery; it literally doesn't fit on certain roads. Whereas in the U.S., I landed in Minneapolis and I drove west for around 5 hours, and I literally just drove in a straight line. There was like maybe one or two turns, and it was just endless, massive paddocks and equally massive amounts of very large machinery. And I even came across a on-farm storage facility of 120,000 in the US in South Dakota. Like, it was absolutely massive, the scale of things there. So from that sense, yes, Australia, US, Canada, similar from a scale perspective. The major difference is that Canada and the US have government support from a subsidy perspective, and they have crop insurance as well. The interesting thing I kind of gathered from that is that how unforgiving Australian farming is compared to somewhere like the US or Canada, because there's just no safety net. In the US or Canada, you can go try new things, and worst case scenario, you get support from a price perspective if prices fall too low, or there's drought insurance against crop failure. Whereas in Australia, there's not much to fall back on.
But don't like it'd just be too much money to get drought insurance over here, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's what I've come across before, and your listeners can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I heard, the few times I asked a question during my career, it's just that it would be too expensive because we just have droughts too frequently, and the premium would be too large.
So at what level is their crop insurance? Is that coming with the seed? So if the seed doesn't strike or they don't get a harvest, is that when it comes in?
So from what I understand, it's different types of insurance, and we can probably get into the weeds pretty quickly, and I just don't know enough about it, so I don't want to make stuff up. But from my understanding, there is insurance from a price perspective, so if prices go too low, and then there's also insurance if you just have crop failure, as an example.
So your time overseas, did you get to actually step foot on a few farms as well?
So in South Dakota, I saw an interesting planter, and tell me if this happens in Australia, and I'm just not paying enough attention. But basically, it maps the whole farm, and it maps all the different soil varieties and soil types throughout the farm. And then as you're planting, it can plant two different varieties of corn at the same time, depending where on that paddock it is. So literally from 1 meter to the other, it scans the soil and then plants a particular variety of corn that will do better in that part of the paddock.
You'd think that would be different to harvest as well, but maybe not. I'm not a corn man. I think their technology and probably progression with corn far exceeds what we're doing just at the scale. It's pretty intensive. I was talking to a couple of farmers over here and they were getting like 42 ton for the year, two crops in that same summer. But the contracts and how they do that over here, because it is smaller scale, it's probably a lot tougher to get and to fulfill and everything, and be the right sort of variety, right finished product as well. What did you learn from corn farmers over there, and how anything that like Aussie farmers could be on the fly on the wall for?
So when I was in Canada, I saw one interesting thing that they have areas on their farms in Saskatchewan where it's too salty, and they get rid of those salty areas or improve them by combining saline salt tolerant grasses. I'm reading from my notes of when I was on this farm in Canada, and lucerne to suck up the moisture. So I'm going to get more details on this and I'll post it on X or Twitter. But I just remember that and I just got my notes out because I remember seeing that and going, how are you growing stuff on there? Because whenever I'm in WA and I go down towards Esperance, I see these areas that just aren't used for anything in the middle of this, like, say, massive canola crop. And it looks like they've figured out a way to actually utilize it. Now, I'm not an agronomist. Maybe there are differences between the situation in Saskatchewan and in WA that I just don't know about from a soil perspective that won't make it viable here. But I saw that and I went, holy crap. Sorry. I went, you know what? That looks exactly like it does in WA, but they're actually growing something on it. So I'll get some more detail and I'll make a post about it.
I think it's like really simple things, and then like countries away here, home in Australia, like we just haven't heard of it, haven't seen it. Like down to the type of point that you use to get your crop in makes all the difference into it, and you sort of just tap your head and go, "Shit, that should have been a thing years ago," but you just haven't. But I suppose within your travels, Dennis, that's some things that you can pick up, and for farmers, getting off farm is probably a really good thing as well.
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And even just going to a different state and having a look at what farmers are doing there, that everyone is so open to just showing you around their farm. Just reach out on Twitter. If you see someone doing something interesting, just reach out, and maybe next time you take a holiday to, I don't know, South Australia or WA, just reach out to that same farmer and say, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee and have a look around the farm, and I'll pester you with some questions.
A coffee in the cab, not a bad way to go.
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned agronomy before, and your rule number 2 was pretty agronomic focused as well, what you picked up there.
Yeah, it was whether I was in the US, Canada, or Australia. Successful farmers, they said they heavily invested time and resources into agronomy and agronomic advice. So they didn't pretend they knew all of it themselves. They just found the best agronomists in their area, and that's who they used. It helped them determine the best crop rotations and to adopt the best practices for their soils. As you know, the healthier the soils, the better the yields. Once successful farmers had an agronomic plan, they strictly stuck to it, and they knew that changing plans due to the fact that some crop prices went higher or lower in any particular year, that just resulted in agronomic problems and hefty agrochemical bills. I think that was the main thing. And it kind of talks to a broader point where you as one individual can't do everything. So you can't be the best agronomist, you can't be the best grain marketer. It's just there's not enough hours in the day. So they sought out advice.
And it can also take the risk out of it of having a failed crop or having a bumper crop on the back of that. I think like following through with your agronomist plan, I think that's probably the best thing that you can do. Maybe a little bit sometimes for better or worse, but that plan is to enact the next step to get to the next level of where you want that paddock to go. I think your conversation with your agronomist has to be firstly established on that paddock's vision, what you want to do and how you want to do it, but also to do that to the best of your ability sustainably, but also economically, making it profit driven as well.
Yeah, and if you have those agronomists who not only do they know their stuff, but they're going to conferences, they're seeing people in different regions, how they're doing things over there, I assume it's absolutely critical to getting the best and the newest advice.
It's probably why they are so good, because they're seeing farms, 10 different farms in one day or in a week, especially here locally in Australia as well, with 5,000 acre sort of farms and a couple of thousand acres. They can sort of cover some good dirt there and see what the best practices are, and they sort of give them to the clients and whatnot. What about their advice and then the inputs they sell? How do they set that up in the States? Are they quite separate in what they do as an agronomist and then inputs, like what we are nutrient elders over here?
So when I was speaking to farmers in Canada, they were saying that a while ago they used to get advice from the same company that sold them their farm inputs. But lately, the specific farmers I was talking to said they got separate agronomic advice. That was just someone who they weren't selling any product. They were just recommending the best practices they thought. Yeah, that's what they said. Yeah, I thought I'd cut this part out. I thought I should tread carefully on that one. But
What
yeah.
about agronomic advice in Europe, or is it just too lush to need any advice at all?
Well, the closest thing to that was that I saw that in particular towns they have what's the best term for it? They have this was in Switzerland, so I think Switzerland in itself is even unique when you talk about Europe. But they collected dung and then they processed it and then they used that as fertilizer. So that was quite niche, and I couldn't imagine that happening on a 30,000 hectare operation in Australia.
I think I saw that tweet on your account. It was pretty funny. And rule number 3, what do we have for that? Adaptability was a recurring theme.
Yeah, that's right. So it was adaptability to testing new seed varieties, adaptability to testing new technology, being on the ball about what's new, what's coming out. Again, from that seed perspective, from a technology perspective, could be from an agrochemical perspective. This particular farmer said the willingness to learn, try, fail, and relearn. They said you're going to try a lot of things, you're going to fail, but the ones that end up succeeding in the longer run are the ones who are willing to test new things and don't just do things because that's what dad did or granddad did or whoever else. They're willing to look further than what they've done in the past and say, could there be a better outcome?
Yep. Not just relying on that's how we always sort of done it. Probably the most dangerous words you can put together.
Yeah, exactly. And this one farmer I was speaking to in South Dakota, very progressive farmer, has done very well. And he said that in his region, the tests have been done from the perspective of variable rate application, and the benefits have been really significant. And yet, when he goes and tells his mates about it, there's a very limited willingness to try it out.
And rule number 4 for successful farmers. What'd you learn?
Yeah, I think this one was an interesting one, and I heard about it not just overseas, but actually probably most frequently in Australia. And one of the reasons is because of that kind of like unforgivingness that I mentioned earlier of farming in Australia compared to countries where there's subsidies or there's other forms of support like insurance as well. Rule number 4 is the ability to take calculated risk and setting themselves up as farmers to be in a good financial position to take those risks when they arise. Or opportunities. So I'll elaborate a little bit more. Costs have increased in recent years. For example, of farm machinery, the profit margins of smaller farmers has been squeezed. That's no secret. But the farmers that survived and thrived were those that got bigger and had economies of scale. Now, successful farmers told me that they are the ones that had the financial ability. They set themselves up prior to these trickier, say, periods during a drought. They set themselves up so that when there was an opportunity to expand, because, for example, maybe they went into a dry spell, they had the ability to take those opportunities. We've seen so much consolidation around Australia. The same things happen in Canada and the US. The farmers that in the long run survived are those that got bigger in many cases so that they could have the economies of scale to buy new machinery that's immensely expensive. The way to do it is to have the financial base to actually expand. And in those times when the opportunities arise where you can buy a farm in that region that you're looking at.
Overseas, like compared to Australia, the generations that have been on that farmland as well. So that probably has an impact in setting them up as solid foundations as well. Is that something that you saw where the farmers talking to you 8th generation, 10th generation?
In Canada, that was the case. In the US, I don't think I specifically heard about that. I'm sure it is the case. It's not a topic that came up. But yes, that definitely is the case. That there are new people who come in, but they typically have to come in with a significant amount of capital. That's not possible for the average person. So say they made a lot of money in a different industry and then they sold whatever they had. Maybe it was a patent, maybe it was a company, and then they got into farming at a large scale where they could afford the machinery and make it economically viable. It's an interesting thing that came up again and again, regardless of where I went, was the consolidation of the farming industry and this kind of this challenge of hollowing rural communities. Everywhere there's been this move towards less farmers and bigger farms, and the result is that there's been smaller rural communities and there's been less funding for whether it's schools or for hospitals, and that in itself drives more people out. So regardless of where I went, that seemed to be a challenge. In Switzerland, when I spoke to farmers about that, they said that that was less so a problem. And my only kind of theory as to why is because the subsidies there focus on not output, but on sustainability practices and organics. They don't focus on, just producing more. As a result, even the smaller farms remain viable, so they don't have a need to actually sell out. Maybe that's one of the reasons they don't have the same consolidation there, whereas margins keep getting squeezed everywhere else. And if the only way to survive is to get bigger, then you just get less and less people. So that's the only kind of reason I could think of why in Europe it's a little bit different.
What's the main commodity of Switzerland?
That's a great question. I saw a lot of cattle. Hold on.
Just thinking.
Let me take back. Let me take a moment back. I didn't actually. I didn't ask. I assume it's something dairy related. Let me check. Let's maybe cut this part out. Biggest.
Dairy I've got.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Switzerland agriculture. Yeah, look, to be honest, I don't know the answer here, so I'll be talking out of my ass. So maybe let's leave that one.
They've got some good apples, apricots, chestnuts, dairy, grapes.
Yeah, okay. No,
Then you get into your hay, maize, and olives.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on that. Sorry, let's maybe cut that one out.
Yeah, all good. Rule number 5. Moving into rule number 5, probably they're not sort of ranked, are they? Or was rule number 1 the most said? Do you think?
No, they're not ranked out of importance. Yes, some of them probably at the top were the ones that were said most frequently. That's why it just came to mind from my perspective. But by no means is one important than 5. So rule 5 was many successful farmers said they sought out grain marketing services and closely followed markets themselves. So a farmer's referenced the importance of knowing how their break-even price changed from one year to the other, and they knew what an acceptable profit margin for them would be. And they were pretty specific and strict on selling once grain prices actually reached those levels that they predefined would be enough for them to make a good margin. And they didn't try to gamble for higher prices. I mean, we all know what happened back when canola hit $1,200 per ton. Everyone thought it's going to keep going, it's going to go to the ends of the earth. It obviously didn't. And same situation there. That they stated that they knew what price they needed to hit, and as soon as they got to that level, they just sold as much as they could. That was kind of their strategy that they told me. And this is where I kind of spruik my book a little bit. Given the amount of geopolitical uncertainty at the moment, it sometimes feels like a lot of what we're seeing in markets is irrational, illogical, and something we've never seen before. In my book, I kind of show that a lot of the things we're seeing right now, and even to a more intense level, has been seen in the past. When I talk about what happened in World War I, World War II, and well, the war in Ukraine, most of us lived through because it was very recent. But if you do want to get a bit of an understanding of why certain things are happening right now and what the outcome could be, highly recommend my book, War and Wheat.
I'll have the link in the show notes again for it. But just looking back on your 5 rules, to me, that screams out that you need to get the support around you and the expertise in the certain fields that they are within your financial agronomic expertise. And then also your marketing for your grains, for any products on farm, really. But for grain producers, that is a very big one because you have the ability to store it, whether you're storing it away to get a higher price and it drops down lower, that can have a big impact. But yeah, I think that's a good takeaway for you.
Yeah, definitely. But the interesting thing was that I think you can look at any sector. It doesn't have to be farming, or in this case specifically, it is farming. And you could think, the things that differentiate a farmer that is successful in the long term versus not successful is a group of rules. And yes, to be fair, that's what I laid out, the 5 specific ones. But the other thing is that from what I've seen, it really also depends on what environment surrounds you. So as an example, farmers in high rainfall regions were said to be successful because they took out a decent loan, expanded their operations very quickly. Now, in that situation, drought was infrequent, and hence their strategy worked pretty well. Whereas in drier regions, farmers who expanded too quickly ended up over-indebted or stretched too thin during a severe dry spell, which threw a significant wrench in this. And that I found incredibly interesting, that if you're, say, coming from one region and you've had a strategy that has worked for decades, and then suddenly you go into a different region where it doesn't rain as much and you try the exact same strategy, potentially it won't work. So again, it's about kind of like the flexibility and adaptability and being willing to learn and understand your surroundings. That's critical. And sometimes farmers said it, simply came down to luck. They said that sometimes it's about getting into farming at the right time, just before the country goes into, a 3-year record production run or prices hit record levels. Sometimes it was literally down to that, but equally they said, look, that could happen once or twice in terms of buying farmland at the right point. But over the long run, there are specific, pretty strict rules that they follow that leads them to be more successful in their terms.
Yeah, I think whatever sort of rainfall you are is just to take advantage of the market, but also of the climate conditions going into the season as well. So for yourself, Dennis, we'll wrap this up. It is getting a little bit late for us to be podcasting about farming, but what was the main takeaway for you as an agricultural economist that you will probably bring and maybe even write another book when the day comes?
Well, look, I don't know if I'm going to write a specific book about it, but the thing that really got to me was whether I'm in Wagga, or I'm in Esperance, or I'm in Saskatoon, or I'm in Bjorkdale. It was incredible how similar farmers were. They were all very welcoming, very open, willing to show their farms, introduced me to other members of their community. It was just, yeah, I was quite stunned how warm and welcoming farmers are regardless of where you go. That was really interesting, because usually if you go to another country, you would go to their capital city and you might go, oh, people here, they act really differently. They don't act like they do in, maybe you're in Melbourne, from Sydney, wherever else. But if you go to rural communities and you speak to farmers there, they all know that good things take time in terms of their crop, and it feels like they just adapt that to everything else in their life as well. So there's a lot of really good down-to-earth people I saw in Europe, in the US and Canada. They all had very similar mentalities to people here in rural areas. So I think that's one of my key takeaways.
That's good. Anything else you'd like to put forth for what you learned over there? Or we sort of wrapped it up in those 5 rules?
I think we wrapped it up in those 5 rules. The only kind of interesting story towards the very end of my trip that I had was I was driving from a place called Bjorkdale to Saskatoon to take a flight, and a mini cyclone went through our pickup truck. And I took a video, it's on my Twitter, that shows the little cyclone once it goes through my car. And I remember turning to the farmer who was driving me and I said, does that happen frequently? And he's like, no, first time in my life.
What did it move you a little bit? Or was
it threw the car around a little bit, and it was a Ford, I think it was like a Ford F-350, if I got that right. So if I'm not making, yeah, it was massive, and yeah, just threw the car around a little bit and then kept going.
The real storm chaser.
Yeah, exactly. Unintentional real storm chaser.
Hey, well, I think this is a great conversation and something for farmers to be a fly on the wall, to learn from your experiences, Dennis, and with your book, War and Wheat, to sort of continue that knowledge and share your expertise. We appreciate it, what you do in your normal role, but also in this role as well. It's good for the industry.
No, thanks for having me. I always like our chats.